When belief became personal, difference quietly followed.
It's a haunting line, isn't it?
It really is. It sounds like the start of some kind of mystery, but it's actually the hook from this narrative piece we're looking at today. It's called The Genesis of Interpretive Distance, and we're diving into episode 9, When Belief Turned into Difference.
Right.
And I have to say, usually when we talk about big societal shifts, we're talking about the loud stuff. Revolutions, wars.
The moments that go bang.
Exactly. But this piece argues that maybe the biggest fracture in human history, it didn't happen on a battlefield. It happened in a chair, in silence, while someone was reading.
It's a fascinating premise. The text is essentially arguing that the moment we moved from listening to stories as a group to reading them alone, we fundamentally broke the unity of the human experience. And the really scary part is we didn't even notice it was happening.
And that's what we're exploring today, how that simple act of private reading created what the author calls interpretive distance, and why that distance might be the reason we can all look at the exact same set of facts today and just come to completely opposite conclusions.
It's really the origin story of modern disagreement.
So let's set the scene a bit. The source material spends a lot of time on this contrast between the before and the after. The before being, the era of oral tradition. And I think it's hard for us to even wrap our heads around that.
It is difficult, yeah, because we're just so steeped in text now. But the source paints this picture of collective listening. Think of a village square or church.
Or around a fire.
Exactly. And someone is speaking, a priest, a storyteller, a leader. Everyone is hearing the exact same words from the same voice at the exact same time.
And the source makes a really interesting point here about correction. It says that in an oral setting, interpretation is controlled.
Right. I mean, think about the mechanics of it. If I'm telling you a story face to face and I see you frown or look confused, what do?
You stop, you'd explain it, you'd say, no, that's not what I meant.
Exactly. I correct you in real time. Or, if you laugh at a part that's supposed to be sad, the rest of the crowd turns and looks at you. There's this immediate social pressure to align your reaction with the group.
So the meaning is held by the group.
The meaning is held collectively, yes. You aren't really allowed to drift off into your own private interpretation because the speaker and the crowd, they act as guardrails.
You're anchored. You're on the same wavelength because you're literally in the same room.
But then, as the text says, belief moved inward. We get the written word. And eventually, people can take a text away from the crowd and into their own homes.
This is the big shift to private reading. And the source has this line that seems like a paradox. It says, private reading did not remain private for long.
That's the core of it, right there.
It feels like a contradiction. I mean, if I'm reading alone in my room, that's the definition of private.
It's private in that one moment.
Yeah.
But think about what's happening inside your head. When you read, the author isn't there. They can't see you frown. The guardrails are gone.
So who fills in the gaps?
You do. The reader becomes a kind of co-author. You decide the tone of voice. You decide what's sarcasm and what's a serious command. You're projecting all your own biases and history onto the ink.
I love the analogy the text uses. It says, two readers could hold the same text and walk away with different understandings. It's such a simple image, but it just changes everything.
It really does. Because for thousands of years, the assumption was, if the input is the same, the law is the law, the holy book is the holy book, then the output must be the same.
The belief should be the same.
Right. But private reading proved that the variable isn't the book. The variable is the reader.
And the source really emphasizes that this happened steadily. It wasn't some kind of explosion.
No. And that's what made it so powerful, so dangerous in a way. If it had been sudden, society might have pushed back, but it was a quiet erosion. The text describes the feeling of the era shifting from unified to varied.
Varied. It sounds so harmless. Like choosing a different flavor of ice cream.
But in a society that's built on absolute unity, whether that's religious or political, variety is a threat. It's the first crack in the foundation.
Which leads to this concept in the text that, well, it took me a second to really get it. The distinction between distance and conflict.
Yes.
The line is, this did not begin as conflict. It began as distance.
This is crucial. We tend to think division means, people screaming at each other. But the source is arguing that the real division happens long before any screaming starts.
It's almost like a relationship, right? A couple doesn't get divorced on the day of the big fight. They get divorced because for 5 years they've been slowly drifting apart.
That's a perfect analogy. The text says, agreement weakened, not through argument, but through interpretation.
Not through argument. That's the key part.
If we're arguing, we're still engaging with each other. I have to listen to you to refute you. We're locked in a struggle, but we're still together in it. Interpretation, though, that happens when I'm alone. I read the text, I decide what it means, and I solidify that meaning in my mind before I ever even check it against yours.
So by the time we actually talk,
It's too late. The bridge is already out. I'm not just disagreeing with your opinion. I'm practically living in a different reality. I've built this whole fortress of logic on my interpretation, and you've built a completely different one.
and the source mentions communities started to feel this. It says questions no longer had single answers. That must have been terrifying for people used to certainty.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine the destabilization. You ask a simple moral question, expecting the standard answer, and suddenly your neighbor hesitates or gives a slightly different answer. It's not a rebellion. Not yet. It's just a drift.
But that drift signals that the collective mind is shattering.
And what pours fuel on this fire? Technology. The source points a finger directly at the printing press.
Right, printing. But the source makes a very careful distinction here. It doesn't just say printing created the division.
No, and this part is so important. I think I underlined it 3 times too.
It says, printing did not create division overnight. It revealed difference that already existed and gave it language.
Gave it language. That's the phrase that just sticks with me.
And unpack that a bit, because I assume people always knew they had different feelings, right? Even before books.
They felt it, sure.
Yeah.
They might have had a gut feeling that they disagreed with the king or the priest, but without a text to study, to pause and reread, it was just a vague mood, an unease.
So the book gave them the receipts.
Exactly, it gave them the vocabulary. Suddenly, you could point to a specific sentence and say, no, look here, it says this, which means that. You could actually articulate your difference.
And once you give a feeling-specific language, it becomes concrete. It becomes a position.
And a position is something you can defend and something you can fight for. The text describes this flow. Belief had moved inward. Now difference began moving outward.
It's a full cycle. You pull the text inside to understand it. That creates a unique interpretation. And then that unique interpretation pushes back out into the world.
And it collides with everyone else's. And that right there is the birth of the modern world. The shifts from we believe to I believe.
The source material wraps this all up with a section called Lessons to be Learned. And honestly, reading them, they feel a bit like warnings.
They're certainly not celebrations. They're observations of consequence.
Okay, so the first one is, interpretation creates diversity of thought. Now, look, I'm an optimist. I see diversity of thought, and I think, innovation, creativity, progress.
And you're not wrong. But the text is looking at it from the perspective of social cohesion. Yes, diversity of thought is great for art and science, but for holding a community together, it's a nightmare.
Chuckles. You're a bit of a buzzkill.
I'm just channeling the source. Think about it. If everyone interprets traffic laws differently, you don't get innovation, you get a car crash. The text is reminding us that interpretation, while it creates richness, destroys the ease of unity. It makes agreement hard work.
That's a fair point. We have to work so much harder to get on the same page now because we aren't starting there anymore.
Precise.
Okay, the second lesson. Difference often appears before conflict.
This goes right back to that distance versus conflict idea. It's a warning, really. Pay attention to the silence.
The silence where people stop engaging.
Exactly. When people stop arguing or asking questions, it usually means they've just retreated into their own private certainty. The text implies that this quiet period is actually the most dangerous time because the divergence is just happening, completely unchecked.
It's the calm before the storm, which leads right into the third lesson. Unity weakens quietly before it breaks.
It's like structural fatigue. A bridge doesn't usually collapse because of one heavy truck. It collapses because of tiny microfractures spreading for years inside the concrete, unseen.
And each personal interpretation is a microfracture.
Yes. Every time you read something and think, I don't quite see it that way, that's a tiny crack in the collective unity. And the source argues these just accumulated over decades, silently, until the whole structure just couldn't hold the weight anymore.
The final lesson is, access to ideas exposes hidden variation.
And this one really challenges that old idea that information cures all. We often think, if we just give people more facts, they'll agree.
I feel that every single day. Just read the article, you'll see.
And yet, history, in this source, tells us the opposite. The more access people had to the texts, the more they disagreed. Access didn't create sameness. It exposed that our brains are just wired differently.
It tore the mask off. When we were just listening to one storyteller, we could all nod along and pretend we understood it the same way. But once we had the book in our own hands, there was no hiding the fact that we saw the world differently.
And that's a bell you can't unring. Once you realize your neighbor might be living in a different moral universe, you can't go back to that naive assumption that you're both the same.
It's almost tragic, isn't it? We think of reading as this noble, connecting act. But this deep dive suggests that reading is also an act of isolation. It's the moment you choose your own meaning over the group's.
It is the ultimate act of individualism. And there's a cost. We gain the self, but we lose that seamless connection to the whole.
So as you're listening, think about the next time you're reading a news article or an email or even just a text message. You're sitting there alone, simulating a voice in your head.
And you're assuming the voice you hear is the one the author intended. But it probably isn't. Not exactly.
You're creating your own meaning, and so is everyone else. We're all walking around with these private versions of reality drafted in the quiet moments of reading.
That is the interpretive distance. The gap between my mind and yours, created by the very text that sits between us.
The story doesn't end there, in the quiet.
No, it never stays quiet.
The source material ends with this very specific, almost ominous continuation line. It's setting up what comes next.
It's the moment the silence breaks.
The line reads, "In the next episode, these differences will begin colliding openly as belief moves from quiet thought into public disagreement."
We spent this whole deep dive talking about the drift, the distance, the quiet separation.
But you can only drift so far before you bump into someone else.
And when you have millions of people all holding their own private, absolute truths, and they finally step out of their quiet rooms to confront each other.
It's not going to be a polite debate.
No, it's going to be a collision.
And that is where we are going next, from the silence of the reader to the noise of the revolution. But for today, maybe just sit with that silence and ask yourself, how much of what you know is just what you've interpreted in the quiet of your own mind?
It's a question worth asking.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you for the collision.